I want to create a world in which my son is proud of what we do, in a world and a job that actually does impact people's lives for the better.
The British monarchy just witnessed something that has not happened in living memory. A sitting king, still on the throne, watched in silence as his own heir issued a formal written order that publicly humiliated the Queen Consort's family. No phone call, no private conversation, no diplomatic whisper through a trusted aide, just cold, documented, institutional authority, delivered with the precision of a scalpel and the finality of a guillotine. Prince William did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply picked up a pen, and with one stroke, Laura Lopes, the daughter of Queen Camilla, was erased from the attendance record of one of the most ancient ceremonies in the entire royal calendar. Now the palace is erupting. Camilla is furious. King Charles is silent. Princess Anne is standing firmly behind her nephew, and the Parker Bowles family, who spent nearly 2 decades carefully embedding themselves into the fabric of royal life, are watching that entire project unravel in real time. So here is the question you need to sit with before we go any further. Is what William has done an act of brilliant, necessary stewardship, the move of a future king protecting the institution he was born to lead? Or is this an exercise of unchecked power by an heir who is moving with dangerous speed while his father is still alive, still on the throne, still wearing the crown? Because the answer to that question will define the monarchy for the next 50 years. The ceremony, the exclusion, and the cold precision of William's move. To understand why this moment is so seismic, you first need to understand what the Royal Maundy Service actually is, because the significance of William's target was not accidental. Nothing about this move was accidental. The Royal Maundy is not a state banquet. It is not a red carpet occasion. It is not the kind of glittering, high-profile spectacle that draws celebrity attention or generates fashion commentary. It is something far more serious than that. Dating back to the 13th century, the ceremony is rooted in the Christian tradition of humility and service. The monarch literally distributes specially minted Maundy coins to elderly recipients selected for their service to their communities and their churches. The symbolism is deliberate and profound. The most powerful person in the kingdom bowing their head in an act of service to the ordinary people. This is why it matters so intensely that William chose this specific ceremony as the site of his intervention. Because the Maundy service, more than almost any other royal event, is defined by its purity of purpose. It is not a networking opportunity. It is not a social occasion. It is not a venue for proximity or prestige. It is a ceremony of duty. And historically, it has been reserved exclusively for working royals and selected dignitaries, those who carry out official functions on behalf of the crown, those whose presence can be justified by the institutional record. Laura Lopes cannot be justified by the institutional record. She holds no royal title. She carries out no official duties on behalf of the crown. She is a private citizen who happens to be the daughter of the Queen Consort. And according to sources embedded deep within the palace's administrative structure, she had, over the course of several years, been treated increasingly as a de facto member of the royal inner circle, attending events, appearing at occasions where her presence had no formal basis, benefiting, in short, from what insiders describe as the Camilla influence, a quiet, patient, and remarkably effective campaign to integrate the Parker Bowles family into the living fabric of the monarchy. For William, this pattern had become a slow-burning institutional crisis, and the Royal Maundy was the moment he decided to end it. The exclusion did not arrive through a corridor conversation. It did not emerge from a whispered instruction to a junior member of staff. It came in the form of a formal written document, an annex of protocol, according to sources within the Lord Chamberlain's office, that updated the standing orders for royal ceremonial attendance. Laura Lopes's name was removed from the attendance list, and the removal was entered into the permanent institutional record. Think about what that means. This was not a suggestion. This was not a request. This was a decree, issued with the full weight of the Prince of Wales's delegated authority, and it has now established a precedent that will govern royal ceremonial access for years to come. The burden of proof in William's new order no longer rests on demonstrating a reason for exclusion. It rests on demonstrating a reason for inclusion. If your presence cannot be justified by official duty, the default answer is no, and that single philosophical shift has rewritten the rules of the royal court more fundamentally than anything that has happened in decades. The question you have to ask yourself is this: did William choose the right battle? Was the Royal Mondy the correct arena for this confrontation? Or was he making a point at the expense of a private individual who never asked to be caught in the crossfire of a palace power struggle? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because this debate is only just beginning. The breaking point, the map room, and the moment Camilla miscalculated. Every seismic confrontation has a specific moment, a single exchange, a particular miscalculation that transforms a simmering tension into an open declaration of war. For the Mondy exclusion crisis, that moment reportedly took place in the map room at Buckingham Palace during a high-stakes coordination meeting for the Easter ceremonial calendar. The meeting was attended by representatives from the various royal households, logistics, scheduling, guest management, the kind of meticulous administrative work that keeps the royal machine functioning. And it was in this setting, unremarkable on the surface, decisive in its consequences, that the fault line between the future king and the Queen Consort cracked open with devastating clarity. Representatives from Queen Camilla's office, according to witnesses to the proceedings, treated Laura Lopes' attendance at the Mondy service not as a proposal, not as a request, but as a settled matter, a foregone conclusion, something that had already been decided and required no further discussion. Her name was on the working list. Her attendance was assumed. There was an implicit message embedded in that assumption that the Queen Consort's family had earned a standing entitlement to these spaces, and that anyone who questioned it was creating unnecessary friction. That implicit message landed with William's team like a declaration of contempt. When representatives from the Prince of Wales' office raised a clear and formal objection, citing the need to protect the ceremonial integrity of the Mondy service, the response from Camilla's camp was described by observers as dismissive, bordering on contemptuous. The attitude, as it was reported through the administrative chain, was essentially this: "This is settled. The family has always been included. Do not waste our time with protocol arguments that serve no practical purpose." But here is where Camilla's network made a fatal miscalculation. They were operating on the assumption that the dynamics of royal proximity that had governed the past 15 years were still in effect. They were reading the room through the lens of an old order, one in which the Queen Consort's social network had genuine power, in which a quiet word in the right ear could smooth over any institutional objection, in which William was still fundamentally the heir-in-waiting, deferential to his father's domestic arrangements. They had not fully reckoned with the fact that William, in 2026, is not that heir. Not anymore. Rather than escalating the confrontation in the meeting room, rather than making it personal, emotional, or dramatic, William executed what insiders now describe as a move of cold administrative brilliance. He walked out of the meeting and directed his team to draft a formal written exclusion, not a memo, not an advisory note, a documented direct, structured as an annex of protocol, entered into the sovereign's diary system through official channels. By putting the decision on paper, William transformed what could have been a reversible interpersonal dispute into a permanent institutional fact. Camilla's network could no longer appeal to personal relationships to resolve the matter. They could no longer seek a quiet conversation with a sympathetic courtier. They could not rely on the diplomatic machinery of family affection to quietly reverse the decision before anyone noticed. The exclusion was on the record. It was part of the permanent administrative architecture of the monarchy. And the moment Camilla discovered that it had already been logged into the sovereign's diary system before she could mount a response, the full weight of what had happened became apparent. This was not William losing his temper. This was William operating with the systematic, clinical precision of a man who had been planning this moment and knew exactly what he was doing. The question that palace observers are now asking is both fascinating and troubling in equal measure. How did Camilla's team, experienced, well-connected, sophisticated in the machinery of royal politics, fail to see this coming? And what does it tell us about the speed and decisiveness with which William is now operating, that even those closest to the throne were caught completely flat-footed? The Wessex precedent, Princess Anne, And the battle Camilla cannot win. The exclusion of Laura Lopes did not exist in a vacuum. Almost immediately, a sharp and bitterly contested comparison emerged within the palace walls, one that Queen Camilla seized upon as evidence of a double standard, and one that William and Princess Anne systematically dismantled with the precision of constitutional lawyers. The comparison centered on James, the Earl of Wessex, the teenage son of Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. During the Easter ceremonial preparations, Sophie had been sidelined by a severe and persistent illness, leaving a visible gap in the working royal roster. James was brought in to stand alongside his father at several engagements, filling that gap with what the palace presented as a demonstration of family continuity and youthful commitment to duty. For Camilla, the optics were impossible to ignore. Here was a young, non-working member of the extended royal family being elevated and celebrated at the very same moment her own daughter was being formally erased from the ceremonial record. She made her objections known clearly and forcefully. If James could step in to support his father during a family health crisis, she argued, then why could Laura not be accommodated to provide support and continuity within the Queen Consort's circle? Was this not, she reportedly demanded, a blatant and personal double standard? It was a sharp argument, but it rested on a foundational misunderstanding that William and Anne were only too willing to expose. James, Earl of Wessex, is a member of the House of Windsor by blood and by birth. He is the grandson of Queen Elizabeth II. He is part of the direct constitutional sovereign line. His presence at royal engagements is not a social favor. It is not a matter of family preference or personal affection. It is, in the language of the palace's institutional framework, an assertion of biological and constitutional permanence. When James stands beside his father at a royal engagement, he is not a guest. He is a manifestation of the bloodline itself. Laura Lopes is a Parker Bowles. She carries no royal title. She holds no place in the constitutional line. She is, by the precise definition that governs these matters, a member of the Queen Consort's private family, not of the royal house. To William and to Princess Anne, conflating these two categories is not merely a logistical error. It is a conceptual attack on the very framework that gives the monarchy its legitimacy. Princess Anne's intervention at this point in the dispute was, by all accounts, decisive and characteristically uncompromising. Anne has spent more decades in relentless royal service than perhaps any other living member of the family. She has carried out engagements at a rate that shames many of her younger relatives. She has sacrificed personal freedom, personal comfort, and personal privacy on the altar of institutional duty without a moment of public complaint, and she has zero patience, zero, for those who attempt to access the monarchy's most sacred spaces without having earned the right through service. She reportedly made her position clear to the household staff in terms that admitted no ambiguity. The working royals framework is not a social invitation. It is a constitutional obligation. James's inclusion was legitimate because it was rooted in bloodline duty. Laura's inclusion would be illegitimate because it was rooted in nothing more than personal connection. And with Anne standing firmly and publicly in alignment with her nephew, Camilla found herself in a position of almost complete institutional isolation. The argument she had been constructing, the narrative of double standards and selective enforcement, collapsed under the weight of the distinction that William and Anne were drawing with such cold precision. This is the moment that long-term royal observers point to when they argue that Camilla fundamentally misread the terrain. She had spent years building a soft power network within the palace, placing sympathetic staff, cultivating relationships, creating an atmosphere in which her family's presence was normalized and their access was treated as routine. She believed on some level that this network was robust enough to absorb and neutralize William's administrative challenge. What she had not understood, or had chosen not to confront, was that William had been quietly dismantling that network for months. The officials she thought would defer to her were now recognizing where the actual operational momentum of the monarchy resided. And it did not reside in the Queen Consort's office. The king's silence and the most powerful statement of the year. There is a particular quality to silence that only those who truly understand power can recognize and deploy. It is not the silence of indifference. It is not the silence of confusion or hesitation. It is the silence of a sovereign who has made a decision so profound, so irreversible, that to speak it aloud would diminish its authority. King Charles III's silence on the Maundy exclusion is, by any analysis, the most consequential statement he has made in the course of this entire crisis. When Queen Camilla brought her grievances directly to the king, and she did, according to sources within his private office, she did not arrive with a mild complaint. She arrived with a full emotional and political case. She framed the issue not as a matter of protocol, but as a personal attack on her dignity and on the loyalty of her children. She reminded the king that Laura and Tom had stood by him through decades of public scrutiny, through the years of scandal and criticism and public hostility that defined the long, difficult road to his coronation. She argued that a king should have the sovereign prerogative to welcome his wife's family into the ceremonial spaces of his own court, and she urged him, directly and explicitly, to exercise that prerogative and override William's exclusion order. The king heard her out, and then he did nothing. He did not summon William for a private conversation. He did not instruct a senior courtier to find a diplomatic compromise. He did not issue a quiet signal through the institutional channels that would have allowed Camilla to save face without a public confrontation. He simply withdrew, retreated into the dignified, strategic silence that has become the defining characteristic of his response to William's escalating authority. And in that silence, he said everything. Because Charles III is not a passive man. He is not a king who simply fails to notice when significant decisions are being made in his name. He is acutely, sometimes painfully, aware of every dimension of the institutional and personal politics that surround him. When he chooses not to act, it is because he has concluded that not acting is itself the most powerful action available to him. By declining to intervene, Charles did not simply allow William's exclusion to stand. He formally validated it. He transformed an administrative directive from his heir into something with the implicit weight of sovereign endorsement. He told the palace machinery, in the coded, unspoken language that those machinery understands better than any explicit instruction, that William's authority in matters of ceremonial management is to be respected, deferred to, and treated as final. Sources close to the king's private office suggest that Charles's calculation was driven by a clear-eyed assessment of the monarchy's fragility during this period of transition. He understands, better than perhaps anyone, that the public appetite for royal privilege and royal excess is at a historic low. He understands that every time the monarchy is seen to be conflating personal affection with institutional authority, it loses a fraction of the public trust that constitutes its only real source of legitimacy. And he understands that William's drive toward constitutional leanness, toward a monarchy defined by service rather than by social hierarchy, is the only sustainable response to the pressures of the modern age. To reverse William's decision would have been to publicly undermine the man who is currently carrying the operational weight of the monarchy. It would have been to side, visibly and unmistakably, with personal loyalty over institutional principle. For a king who has spent his entire adult life being accused of placing personal desires above public duty, that was a concession he was simply unwilling to make. So the silence held, and in holding, it echoed through every corridor of the palace with the force of a formal proclamation. The question worth sitting with here, and it is not a comfortable question, is whether this silence represents wisdom or abdication. Is Charles making a courageous, far-sighted decision to prioritize the long-term health of the institution over the short-term harmony of his marriage? Or is there something quietly devastating about a king who will not defend his wife's family against his own son's administrative scalpel? Tell us what you think in the comments. This is the kind of question that does not have an easy answer. The Doctrine of Sovereign Intent and the New Royal Order. Constitutional historians and senior palace observers have begun to deploy a phrase that captures the full scale of what William is building. They call it the Doctrine of Sovereign Intent. And understanding what that doctrine means is essential to understanding why the Maundy exclusion is not merely a significant moment, it is a defining one. For centuries, the British monarchy has functioned on a carefully balanced system of consultation, consensus, and accumulated precedent. The sovereign reigns, the heir waits, the senior courtiers advise and moderate, and within this system, the various competing interests of the royal household, the consort circle, the extended family networks, the institutional old guard, find ways to coexist through a combination of diplomatic flexibility and social management. William is dismantling that system, not through confrontation, not through public drama, but through the patient, methodical, legally irreversible accumulation of documented precedents. Every formal directive he issues, every annex of protocol he adds to the standing orders, every name struck from an ancient register. Each of these acts builds upon the last, creating a body of institutional law that defines the new royal order with increasing precision. The doctrine of sovereign intent holds that the operational authority of the monarchy should be exercised with absolute clarity about its constitutional basis. Every person present at a royal ceremony should be there because their presence serves a documentable institutional purpose. Every expense authorized in the name of the crown should be traceable to a specific duty-based function. Every access granted to the palace's ceremonial and private spaces should be earned through service, not inherited through proximity. In practice, this doctrine represents a radical professionalization of the monarchy. It treats the royal household not as a family estate to be managed according to the preferences of those who live within it, but as a high-functioning instrument of the state to be governed with the same standards of accountability and transparency that apply to any other major public institution. For those who have benefited from the old, softer, more accommodating order, and the Parker Bowles family are the most visible example, but by no means the only one, this doctrine is nothing less than a declaration that their era is over. Sources within the Duchy of Cornwall and the Privy Council indicate that William's authority has become, in practical terms, functionally absolute in matters of ceremonial and personnel management. The fact that he could remove a name from the Maundy list without a formal instruction from the King's office speaks to a level of delegated authority that is, in the words of one constitutional observer, unprecedented while a monarch remains in residence. This is not a formal regency. King Charles is still the sovereign. He still wears the crown. He still signs the documents. But in the day-to-day operational management of the monarchy, in the decisions that shape who inhabits its spaces, who represents its ceremonial face, and who is granted access to its most sacred institutions, William is already functioning as the king. And crucially, the institutional machinery of the palace has accepted that reality. Officials who would previously have deferred to the Queen Consort's office are now recognizing and acting on the fact that the Prince of Wales is where the operational momentum resides. The Maundy exclusion did not just remove Laura Lopes from a guest list, it told every department of the royal household, loudly, clearly, and permanently, that the new chain of command is now in effect. The Parker Bowles network is discovering, with what must be a cold and disorientating shock, that the world they have been navigating for the past 15 years has already ceased to exist. The soft power that Camilla constructed, the sympathetic staff placements, the normalized access, the cultivated atmosphere of family integration, was built on a foundation that William has now removed. The presumption of attendance has been replaced by a requirement of justification, and for those whose presence cannot be justified by documented duty, the palace doors are closing. Camilla's isolation, the social winter, and the irreversibility of what has happened. The most devastating aspect of Queen Camilla's current position is not the anger. Anger, at least, is an active emotion. It carries energy, it motivates response, it holds open the possibility of reversal. The most devastating aspect is the isolation, the slow, systematic, bureaucratically enforced isolation of a woman who spent decades fighting to reach the position she now holds, only to find that position being hollowed out from beneath her by the very institution she was fighting to join. In the weeks following the Maundy exclusion, sources indicate that Camilla attempted to mobilize her network within the palace to challenge William's administrative restructuring. She sought meetings. She raised objections. She reportedly attempted to frame the exclusion of her daughter as a harbinger of a wider pattern of personal hostility, not just toward Laura, but toward her entire family. She wanted allies. She wanted champions. She wanted voices within the institutional machine who would push back against what she perceived as an overreach of authority. She found very few. The officials she believed to be sympathetic were navigating a new institutional reality in which their professional futures depended on aligning with the operational authority. And the operational authority was unmistakably Prince William. The senior members of the royal family who might have offered support, who might in an earlier era have formed a counterbalancing coalition, were either publicly aligned with William's position or maintaining a careful neutrality that amounted to the same thing. Princess Anne's alignment was not merely passive, it was active and pointed. She made clear, through the institutional channels available to her, that the working royal's framework was a principle she would defend without reservation or sentiment. The bloodline is the institution. Everyone else is a guest. That formulation, stark, clean, historically grounded, left no room for the argument that family loyalty should translate into ceremonial access. The comparison between Camilla's situation and Sophie's, the Duchess of Edinburgh, whose dedication through serious illness drew widespread admiration from within the palace, has added a further layer of bitter irony to Camilla's position. Camilla's own absences, her periods of rest and recuperation, have been met with something rather different from the warm institutional praise that greeted Sophie's stoic perseverance. A colder, more critical silence from the Prince of Wales's camp, a pointed contrast that speaks to a deeper philosophical divide at the heart of the royal household. For William and Anne, royal life is a moral vocation, a relentless, non-negotiable commitment to public duty that demands total transparency and complete subordination of the personal to the institutional. There is no such thing as a convenient absence. There is no such thing as a period of strategic withdrawal from the spotlight. The duty is permanent and unconditional, and those who fulfill it earn their place in the ceremonial record through that fulfillment alone. For Camilla, the picture is more complicated. She came to royal life late. She came to it through a path that was never going to be straightforward, and she has managed that path with considerably more skill and resilience than many predicted. But her understanding of the monarchy, shaped by years of navigating it from the outside, from the position of someone seeking access rather than someone born to discharge its obligations, reflects a different set of assumptions about what royal life is and what it requires. And those assumptions, which served her reasonably well in the more accommodating atmosphere of the late Charles-era court, are now being systematically invalidated by a future king who has a very different vision of what the monarchy is for. The social winter that Camilla is now experiencing is not merely personal, it is institutional. Sources indicate that even minor administrative events are increasingly difficult for her extended family members to access. The clearances that were once routine are now being scrutinized. The presumptions that once governed her children's relationship with palace life are being reviewed. The invisible network of courtesy and accommodation that made their integration possible is being dismantled methodically and permanently by a series of quiet administrative decisions that collectively amount to a constitutional revolution. Once a name has been struck from the Mondi Register, from an institution whose records stretch back to the medieval period, the removal establishes a precedent of exclusion that cannot be erased by a subsequent act of personal generosity. To restore Laura Lopes to the list would require a public and humiliating reversal of the Prince of Wales's documented authority. It would require the king to publicly overrule the man who was functionally operating as his successor. It would create the kind of constitutional contradiction that the palace's entire bureaucratic structure is designed to prevent. William has, in the language of chess, created a position from which there is no escape. The old order is in check, and the new order is already being constructed around it. What comes next? The coronation anniversary and the architect of the new Windsor order. The Mondi exclusion was not an ending. It was a beginning, a proof of concept, an opening move in a campaign that is still accelerating. And the next phase of that campaign is already taking shape in the protocol offices of Windsor and Kensington. Sources within the palace indicate that William is now applying the same duty-based audit that governed the Mondi guest list to the upcoming anniversary celebrations of King Charles's coronation. Guest lists are being reviewed. Ceremonial roles are being assessed. Every individual whose presence at a significant royal event cannot be traced to a documented institutional function is being subject to the same scrutiny that Laura Lopes faced, and the standard of justification is being applied with equal rigor regardless of personal relationship or historical precedent. The Parker Bowles family are not the only extended relatives who are discovering that the new rules apply to them. The message being broadcast through the palace's administrative channels is clear and universal. The era of access by association is over. The era of proximity as privilege is over. If you cannot point to a duty that justifies your presence will not be accommodated. For the monarchy as an institution, the long-term implications of this shift are significant and potentially transformative. A monarchy that is genuinely defined by service, that is seen to apply its ceremonial resources with accountability and transparency, is a monarchy that is substantially better positioned to defend its existence in an age of growing scrutiny and diminishing deference. The public appetite for a royal family that operates like a privilege-distributing social club is essentially non-existent. The public appetite for a royal family that is seen to work harder, serve more, and maintain cleaner lines of accountability is considerably more robust. William understands this. He has understood it for years, and the Maundy exclusion is the clearest public signal yet that he is prepared to act on that understanding, even when acting means generating friction with the people closest to the throne. The architecture of the new royal order is being built in real time, brick by brick, protocol by protocol, precedent by precedent, and the man building it is no longer content to wait for the keys. The keys are already in his hand. But here is the final question, the one that cuts to the heart of everything we have discussed today. William's vision of the monarchy is lean, disciplined, constitutionally rigorous, and focused on public service. Those are not small virtues. Those are the virtues that have kept the House of Windsor relevant when other royal houses have collapsed under the weight of their own excesses. But a monarchy that is purely institutional, that subordinates every human relationship to the demands of protocol, that treats the palace as an office rather than a home, that applies administrative scalpels where perhaps some human warmth might serve better, is also a monarchy that risks losing something essential, something that cannot be measured in protocol documents or duty records. The question of whether William's cold administrative precision is the salvation of the monarchy or the beginning of a different kind of crisis is one that only time can fully answer. What we can say with confidence today is this: a new order has been established. It has been established formally, permanently, and in writing. The era of the Parker Bowles encroachment is over. The era of Camilla's soft power network within the palace is over. The era of access by association, of proximity as privilege, of the all-inclusive royal family as a social institution, all of it is over. What has begun, in its place, is the era of the sovereign mandate, leaner, stricter, less forgiving of the personal, more accountable to the public, and entirely shaped by the vision of one man who has decided that the monarchy he inherits will be built on duty, or it will not exist at all. Prince William has made his move, the palace has erupted, and the Windsor dynasty will never look quite the same again. This is, without question, one of the most consequential internal power struggles the British monarchy has witnessed in modern times, and we are just at the beginning of it. The coronation anniversary is coming. The next phase of William's institutional reform is already in progress. The Parker Bowles family are navigating a social winter that shows no signs of thawing, and King Charles, still on the throne, still wearing the crown, still choosing the strategic silence that validates his son's authority, is watching the monarchy he has spent his entire life preparing for be reconstructed according to a blueprint he did not design. So we want to hear from you. Was William's move on the Maundy guest list an act of necessary stewardship, the bold, principled action of a future king refusing to let sentiment compromise the institution, or was it an overreach, a demonstration of power that went further than the moment required, at the expense of a private individual who never asked to be the centerpiece of a constitutional confrontation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you believe this story matters, if you think the inside account of what is happening behind the palace walls deserves a wider audience, then subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really happening inside the House of Windsor. Because the secrets of the palace are being told, the transition is happening in real time, and we will be here for every line of it. The sovereign mandate has begun, and nothing, not Camilla's anger, not the Parker Bowles network, not even the silence of the king himself, is going to stop it.